I have been composting and teaching about composting and writing about composting for over 20 years. And I am going to talk to you today about backyard composting, why it's a helpful practice, especially this time of year as you're getting ready to start your gardens or revive your gardens. And I'll talk about different ways that you can compost. Mostly we're going to be talking about backyard, but I've put a few slides in here about ways that you can actually compost in smaller spaces, on porches or even indoors, and some tips and tricks so you'll be successful. So let me go to the next slide. So I'm going to take just 2 minutes to talk about, before we dive too much into composting, and talk about soil. And the reason is, why is soil important? It's not just a lifeless substance that helps hold up our plants. You have a whole ecosystem, a whole food web underneath your feet. And the healthier the soil, the happier your plants are going to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes up really healthy soil. So you've probably heard sand, silt, and clay before. That makes up about 30% of your soil. The rest of it, you have air, you have water, and you have organic matter. So the organic matter, that 10%, if you have really healthy soil, it's going to be between 5 and 10%. That's the humus, or the decayed stuff, the stuff that's broken down, the old leaves, the compost. But then it also has living organisms. It makes up that 10% organic matter. So what happens when your soil is compacted, or you've not added organic matter, or you just inherited really poor soil from your last homeowner, is your soil gets degraded and you lose a lot of the air, a lot of the water, and a lot of the organic matter. And that means that the system is broken. You have less life in your soil. So I have one more sciencey slide, I promise. But your plants rely on organisms that live in the soil to get nutrients from that soil to feed their roots. The plant itself isn't the one that is sucking those nutrients up out of the soil. They actually have organisms that live all around the roots that are pulling that in. So if your plant's roots cannot soak up the nutrients, they can't do it without the microorganisms. They live in a symbiotic relationship. So you don't need to understand all the science behind the slide, but in order to really appreciate composting's benefit for the plants, and even if you're not a gardener and you just want to have healthy trees or healthy grass, you really having healthy soil is going to be key to making that happen. So how do we increase soil organic matter? You probably already could guess the answer to that: compost. So it increases soil organic matter, it decreases soil erosion, it adds essential nutrients, it encourages microorganisms, and you're doing it all with stuff that many people would consider garbage. So let's define a little bit about what is backyard composting. Just like gardening controls what plants grow where in your yard, composting is creating a system to recycle materials into a beautiful soil amendment in your backyard. So there's a few different ways that you can compost, and I'm going to go through some of the methods. This is one of the most simple, is just having a leaf bin. And this is a picture of one of 3 leaf bins that I have in my yard. And I give instructions for making this bin from both in both of my books. It's a really nice way to start backyard composting. It's super easy. You can pretty much any leftover fencing that you have, you can build this bin out of. If it's a little floppy, you can put stakes in to hold it up for more support. But this compost bin holds the equivalent of 5 paper leaf bags. What's great is if you have a backyard, you likely have leaves, or maybe your neighbors have leaves. But the leaves will take a while to break down on their own in here. So one thing that you can do if you want to start really simple, and this is all you want to do, is you can put leaves and you can grind them up if you want it to go faster, and you can put coffee grounds in there. Coffee grounds and leaves make a beautiful finished compost. You don't have to add anything else if you don't want to. if you want to step that up a little bit, you could put plant trimmings in there with it. So this photo here was taken in my yard in May. I want to show you what that leaf bin looked like 6 months before that. It really decreases in volume over time. So this was 6 months before. This is in November. And you can see I have a lot of oak leaves. I did not this year. I sometimes will rent a mulching mower. I don't have one. I have such a small grass plot in my yard that we just use a weed whacker. But we have a lot of trees around our property. It's old oak trees. And so we get a lot of oak leaves. If I mulch this up, it goes even faster. So the smaller the pieces, the faster that this is going to happen. But all of the leaves that were around this bin, I raked up and put into the bin once it dropped a little bit, and you can see how quickly it will. This type of bin, though, is not great for composting food scraps. As you can imagine, little squirrels and chipmunks and raccoons are just going to be able to dive in there, dig in, and get your food scraps. So if you're wanting to compost food scraps, which is going to give you a little bit higher nutrients in your finished compost, then I have a few better options. This is my this black compost bin in the center here is a standard black compost bin. You could get those pretty much at any hardware store. And then I have a leaf bin next to it. This is my oldest compost bin, and it's also my favorite. Don't tell my other bins, but it will hold in moisture and heat. It has a locking lid, so it's going to keep out rodents and other curious critters out of your bin. It's open to the ground, so it is going to allow soil organisms to come up into the pile. So when you start composting, we're going to talk more about organisms. You do not have to add worms or anything to it. They will come from the ground as long as it's touching the ground. They're really easy. They just make life easier. If you're going to start with these black bins, I would suggest you do two so that you can have one that you're adding to, and then when that's full, you can be adding to the other and then just let that other one cook, so to speak, or finish composting. I always locate a leaf bin next to my food scrap bin so that every time I add food scraps to my composter, I will put in and cover it with leaves. And let me show you another bin that I have in my backyard, which is probably prettier than the other one. Another option is to build a bin. So you can, this bin we built for the Composting for a New Generation. We built a similar bin out of old pallets for the no waste composting, which I tried to integrate more reuse into. This bin is in particular made out of raw cedar, so it still is looking great. 6 or 7 years later. But what's nice is that the boards pull out from the front of this one so that you can harvest finished compost pretty easily. Just scoop it in there with pitchfork or shovel. I did change the roofing on this one. I made it the wire mesh that you see on the sides to let in more rain. But this bin took quite a while because we had my friend is a carpenter and he designed it and built it, but we built a similar bin out of old pallets for the other book in just 2 hours and much less money. A couple other options. This is my friend Dorothy. She was one of the models for no waste composting, and we built a trash can tumbler. This is not the prettiest of bins. It looks like a trash can because it is a trash can, but basically we drilled holes in it to allow it for drainage, and you can mix the materials in there, roll it around, and as long as you have a place to hide it or you don't mind, you can put it in a place that you don't mind the look of it. This is a pretty inexpensive way. The other one next to it, the terracotta colored one, is an old pickle barrel. So we have a pickle factory in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm located. And I went and they sold me an old pickle barrel for $10, and I was able to turn it into a compost bin. We also, and so that was in no waste composting, but I will say I also bought one of these and turned it into a rain barrel. So they make pretty nice rain barrels as well. A few other methods that are a little less conventional. The one on the top is an African keyhole garden. And the idea here is that you're building a raised bed. You can build it out whatever you want, but then you have a wire mesh compost bin in the center, and you add your food scraps. If you water the raised bed, you water it through the compost, and it adds moisture and helps the vegetables grow. This is something that was developed in Africa, in arid areas of Africa, where they wanted to grow vegetables, but it was, almost desert-like conditions. And having the raised bed like that with a constant water source from that decomposing material helped to keep the vegetables that they were growing moist. The ones on the bottom is an interesting idea. This is called hugelkultur, and this is if you've ever heard of permaculture, hugelkultur is a method that's used in permaculture, and it's just basically kind of mimicking nature is the idea. It's usually done in mounds, so you'll see people dig a little bit of a trench, but then mound up really woody material, things that you would normally not put in a compost bin because it takes decades to decompose. This stuff would probably take a couple years. It's a little thinner, but you usually would build a mound, and then you would have like a raised bed that you would plant on. This idea is to use hugelkultur in the bottom of a raised bed. And this is a little bit more accessible for most of us. I mean, I have a very small backyard. I realize that not everybody has a big backyard that they can build mounds in, but this is a nice way. So as those branches and you put manure and other things in there, as those break down, they add water and nutrients to the plants above. So hugelkultur is another idea. I'm just going to show you a couple slides of some alternative methods of composting that you can do in small spaces. That's one of the things I wanted to focus on when I wrote No Waste Composting, is just to recognize that not everybody has a big yard or even a yard at all. And so I'm going to just show 3 of the methods that I highlighted. These are terracotta pots, and this is a terracotta composting system. It's very popular in India. And even Peru. And it's popular because you'll have a lot of apartments that have balconies or even fire escapes where you can go outside and dry your clothes and that kind of thing. And so that's where this is best used. I actually did test this out in my kitchen for a few months just to see if it had odors, but you are creating a habitat where there could be fungus, so you don't necessarily want to do this indoors, but it didn't smell and it decomposed material. So the idea is you've got a static bottom pot that just always stays, but then you have pots up on the top, and you can stack several of them that have holes in them, and you use something called cocoa peat and as your brown, because if you don't have a backyard, you likely don't have a bunch of leaves that you can use as a brown material. And I'm going to talk about the balance between brown and green. So you use the cocoa peat to cover up your food scraps, and then it just slowly decomposes. I don't usually mention this, but I actually bought this system from a company that's in New Jersey called Eco Rich. If you're interested in looking them up, I paid a small fortune to have it shipped to Ohio, so maybe you'd be able to get a deal on them. Another idea, which you've probably heard of, is vermicomposting. This is really the only safe method that you can do indoors, because you're actually having worms eat the compost, and you're not composting in a traditional sense. You build a little bin, and I put plans in both books on how to build these bins. You just, get one of those Rubbermaid containers and you drill holes in it. You want some nice moist shredded paper. I like to add some leaves in there. This is my daughter. She's 11 now, so this is a little old, but it's also her hand because she loves worms. But the red wigglers, which you have to use a very special kind of worm. It's Isonita fetida. It's not just any, you can't just go and dig up some earthworms and throw them in there. They like to live in the leaf litter naturally, and they eat up to half their weight in food scraps every day. So that you're creating a habitat, and they will compost your food scraps. And the vermicompost, if you ever I've tried to buy it, it's actually really expensive because it's some of the best compost for seed starting. The final kind of special method that I'm going to talk about is bokashi. This is something that's really popular in Japan, and basically you're using like an airtight bucket and you're trying to keep all the air out, which is not what you're usually doing with composting. And you use a special brand and you're fermenting the food scraps. And you either, this is more of like pre-composting. You actually have to either bury the fermented food scraps or finish them in a backyard bin. But it does make it so that you can accumulate food scraps for quite a while. It would take a couple months possibly to fill up this bucket, depending on how much fruit and vegetables you eat. And I did include a method in no waste composting and making your own just out of 5-gallon buckets. So on to the basic rules of composting. So when you're composting, you want to have about 2 to 3 parts brown to every 1 part green. And so when I talk about brown materials, I'm talking about shredded newspaper, leaves, even sawdust or mulch. Those things are brown. And then green materials would be food scraps. Coffee grounds are actually considered a green material. You do not want to compost meat, dairy, oily vegetables, any of those materials, because they're going to smell bad as they decompose and attract critters to your bin. If you want to compost meat or even dog manure, I've included a few special kind of advanced methods in no-waste composting. But if you are just starting out, I'd recommend avoiding those. That's kind of like level up, master's level of composting. So the next thing I want to talk about is, and which I've already kind of mentioned, is every time you add food scraps to your bin, you want to cover them with leaves. If you get nothing else out of my presentation, please take that away. Always bury your food scraps. You should never see food scraps peeking out of the pile when you open up the lid. You want to keep the pile about as wet as a wrung out sponge. And if it gets too dry, our microorganisms dry off and they can't do their job. So if you take a gloved hand and you pick up a pile of compost and you squeeze it, it should maybe 1 drop of water comes out. If you're squeezing it and it's like a pile, a stream of water coming out, then you have it's too wet. And if you go in and it's like all crackly and it's just dry, like a dry pile of leaves, then it's too dry. You really do need the pile to have some moisture to keep those bacteria alive. The problem with getting it too wet, though, is that you start attracting the same bacteria that hang out in swamps, and the pile really starts stinking. So once a month, you want to, or as often as once a week, you don't want to do it more than once a week. You want to add air with a pitchfork, or I have a special tool called a wing digger. It's basically just like a fancy metal stick that has a point at the end, and you push it down, and as it comes up, it opens up its wings, and that helps get air into the pile. That's going to help speed up your composting. So one thing when you're starting out your composting, you want to think about is how to start the pile. So the best way to start would be with a few feet of shredded leaves. Like I said, if you want to take a baby step into composting, you can get really nice finished compost with just shredded leaves and coffee grounds. You can see this picture I mentioned, you can do a wire bin and have stakes to hold up your fencing if you need it. But any type of composting that you're starting, even if it's in the black bins, it's really good to start with a couple leaves of shredded leaves. Now, if you don't care how fast you get your finished compost, you don't need to worry about shredding them. But it does go a lot faster if you shred them or if you make the material smaller. So if you have a pumpkin that you're adding and you can smash it up, then you're going to get your pile is going to decompose faster and you're going to get that finished compost faster. So a big question I get is, how do we know it's done? Um, it will no longer be hot or steaming. That's one way that you know it's done. If it's super hot, it's still composting. It's not going to resemble food scraps anymore. You'll probably, if you've added food scraps, you'll see maybe avocado peels or the seeds from avocados, but it shouldn't, you should no longer see things that resemble food. You might see the stickers that accidentally got left on. It's going to smell earthy and look crumbly. It's going to have a really lovely kind of earthy smell. Occasionally, you're going to dig into a compost pile and it's going to be too wet and it's going to look more like mud and you're going to think you did something wrong and you haven't. It's okay. Composting is very forgiving. And if you just leave that dry out for a day or two and then go back, it's going to start being that crumbly, earthy, wonderful soil amendment that you want. So harvesting finished compost. I'll talk a little bit about this. You do not need 3 grown men to help you harvest your compost. This was a photo taken at a local master composter class, but they're demonstrating screening the compost. Now, when you go to dig out your compost, once, if you're using the black plastic bin and you lift it up, I would recommend you lift it up and set it off to the side. There is like a little door on a lot of those black plastic bins where you can access the stuff at the bottom. And while, yes, if you needed just a couple little shovels of compost, that would be that would work. But if you were wanting to harvest the whole bin, trying to get through that little door is just ridiculous. So just pick up the whole compost, set it to the compost bin, set it to the side, and then you can get in there with a shovel. You do not need to screen your finished compost. You can just take that, dig it into your soil where you need soil amendment, and you're good to go. However, if you've never experienced the pleasure of screening your compost, I would highly recommend it. It is, this whole process from start to finish can take 3 months, it can take 6 months, it can take a year, depending on how, much you're turning your pile, if you're, how often you're adding, what your temperature is like. But it does feel a lot like, it's the satisfaction of screening that compost is very similar to, say, if you're a quilter and you've built or if you're an artist and you've painted something, or even growing your own tomatoes. I will say, when you take the time to run the material through the screener and get rid of the big things that maybe aren't finished composting, or the yogurt cup your kid accidentally put in there, like mine do, the stuff that comes out the bottom is just so pretty. It's like a reveal. You get this, wheelbarrow full of just this gorgeous finished compost, and it's prettier than anything you buy in the store. And there's just I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, and I'm a self-proclaimed compost geek, but it feels, you just get this great satisfaction, and you know that you've made it out of garbage. So I've never knitted my own sweater or made a quilt, but I imagine it's a similar feeling. So they are demonstrating how to do that. You basically always wear gloves. You want to run the compost back and forth, and then anything that's not quite finished or doesn't go through, you can toss back in the pile. So I've got I can keep going on about compost, but I'd like to take some time for questions. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the two books that I have. One is Composting for a New Generation. It is the first book that I wrote. It is much longer than No Waste Composting. It goes into a lot. The Composting for a New Generation goes into a lot of the science behind composting. There's a whole chapter dedicated to the science. There is a lot more about backyard. So we go into the hugelkultur and the African keyhole garden. There's a lot. It goes more into depth about composting, and then also kind of side notes about other related things. So like rain barrels and growing mushrooms in compost, and lots of different little side journeys that you can take. No Waste Composting does have actually some some of the same content as Composting for a New Generation. And so it has the the vermicomposting chapter. It talks about the backyard bin, but then it has much more focus on small space composting. So I have a whole chapter on composting, like with the terracotta pots and how to make your own. Everything in there is DIY. So I even talk about how to make your own bokashi bin. And I try to focus on materials that you already have around your house, or that you could go to, a building resale place and buy, or that would be really easy to DIY. So the no waste composting has a lot of projects that are made from reused material, like the pallet bin. And I really try to pull reuse in there. The no waste composting is actually part of a no waste series that Quarto Publishing did. So there's no waste kitchen gardening. I did not write any of the other no waste books. The no waste composting is the only one that I wrote. I also wanted to mention that I'm on Instagram. My handle is Compost Geek if you want to look me up and you are interested in seeing me and my adventures in composting. I don't post that often, but every once in a while I'm on there.